Hey everyone, welcome to From Pieces to Peaceful. I'm your host, Blaze, and I am bringing you real stories of healing, resilience, and creating a life you love because no matter where you've been, peace is possible. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, I'm so glad that you're here watching or listening today. Today I have one of my favorite people, Marlee. Marlee Liss, thank you so much for being here. Woohoo!
Hey, thank you for having me. I love every conversation we've ever shared, so I'm very stoked to be coming together for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Marlee is a speaker. She's a motivational speaker that travels all over the world to speak now. She is an author. She's also the founder of Survivors for Justice Reform, which we'll get into what that is. And Marlee, when I found you, I was doing a lot of work in the world of sexual assault survivors and not so much justice reform. Like that was really a new term to me that you brought to me. And it's so I can't wait to talk more about that. But with the work I've done with survivors and victims, I saw your Instagram page and you were talking about all these heavy topics that I'd been doing survivor speaking on, but really struggling, like feeling just so, it would just like deplete me so much, which is okay. But I would see you talk about it and then kind of almost in the same breath or in the next Instagram story be dancing around to Taylor Swift or, like having fun, being out and about. And you bring so much vibrance and joy. And like, I think of the term a lot, joy is my justice. And I feel like you really live that. And so first of all, just thank you like for having the courage to share all the things you do and show us that you can have a life of joy and fun, even with heaviness. And I just think it's brought me so much hope. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that reflection. And I am such a proponent for radical joy and like recognizing the power of our joy in a world with so many oppressive systems and whatnot. So I appreciate that and the inner child in me who just wants to twirl and wear sparkles is beaming. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to hear about maybe starting with like where you are today, kind of what your life looks like, and then maybe we can go backwards a little bit to how you got to this place or what led you here.
Yeah. Well, right now, okay, so let's come to today. Um, I'm very grateful to be an entrepreneur. I think that my spirit is made to be an entrepreneur, so I'm very grateful for that. Um, I am currently a full-time speaker focused on reimagining justice for sexual violence and along with that, preventing violence through inclusive consent education and pleasure education as well. So there's kind of two arms to that work. And I'm a queer Sagittarius dog mom. Um, What else? I just went for a really nice walk in the forest with my sister who's visiting from the West Coast and my mom. So that's nice too. And I'm also working on my book right now. That's been like my really big project baby for the past year is finally writing my story in a really deep and creative way. And I'm really, really loving the identity of writer. Like I think we put on these different hats and we're like, I'm a dancer, I'm a writer, I'm an activist. And I'm like, I'm really enjoying the writer hat. So yeah, that's today.
That's so fun. I can't wait to read your book. So how is the writing going? Like, do you have a process? Do you just wait till you're inspired? Do you have like discipline times? How are you doing it?
Yeah, I have, there's a siren going right now. Do you hear it or is it okay?
A
Okay.
little bit. That's okay.
Yeah.
Just
Do
go
you want
like,
me to
woo, she's a writer. No,
pause?
you're good.
Okay. Um, I have an amazing literary agent who feels like a midwife in this process because I'm just like, I don't know, it's really helping me. I'm really realizing the power of having people help you, of having a team, like having people sort of hold you accountable to your goals and visions and give feedback. I think we're kind of trained in our culture to take pride in doing it all on our own. And it's like, that's really not it. It's really not the way or the vibe. So that's why I'm like shouting her out first. Because I think that's really holding me accountable to like a disciplined process where I'm trying to write about one chapter per week.
Oh,
Um, but I'm really loving it. Like I also want to shout out the book Big Magic by Liz Gilbert. Have you read it?
oh my God,
Oh,
I love that book.
it's like my I'm not even Christian, but like my Bible or my Torah to honor my roots right now. Um, because yeah, like on the theme of radical joy, I'm just like she talks so much about creating in a way that's like grateful and excited and human and honest. And like, I think so often we hear this kind of like brooding artist archetype of someone who's like, oh, I have to write my book. And I'm like, actually, I've been dreaming of writing my book my entire life. And now I'm doing it. So like, can I find the joy and if not the joy, can I at least find the curiosity? Which has been great. And I also find like when the world feels out of control and overwhelming, like having an art-based project to return to is really a grounding gift.
Yeah, that's so great. And yeah, anybody listening, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, especially creatives, but that book, I remember what really stood out was how many times I like audibly was like, whoa, like reading it. Just so many like little quotes that were just mind-blowing to me and how she talks about fear. I have recounted that to so many people over the years. So that book is awesome. Yeah.
Yes, I'm listening to it on audio right now, like for like the third time almost. Like it's just like a meditative pep talk, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, love that. Well, but can you tell everyone sort of your story that led you to the work you're doing now?
Yes. So, I was already passionate about, I guess I'd say challenging objectification because I was already studying social work and I was really, having grown up in competitive dance land, I had seen a lot of people struggle with eating disorders and I had struggled with that as well. And so going through social work, I started to kind of see how these things connect to objectification. And so I was really passionate about that and I wanted to work in that space. And then I ended up experiencing, while I was studying, sexual violence from a stranger. And I had had non-consensual experiences before, but I think that in the context of rape culture and like quote, quote, hookup culture, those were things that I was able to brush aside and normalize and not see them as harmful at the time. And then going through this, it was like the most undeniable rape experience. And so it really took me down. I couldn't pretend to be fine. I couldn't suppress it and get on with my day. Like I was having panic attacks. I was breaking out in hives. I had to like drop out of school. And all at the same time, I was sort of going through the motions of what survivors are told we're supposed to do. So, like, I literally Googled, what do you do after being raped?
Oh.
And yeah, that led me to the hospital where I did a rape kit. And then that sort of led to a moment where the nurse said, you can either report to the police or you can just go home. And as you know, a big part of what I'm doing now is challenging that dichotomy, like this idea that we either have to go through the court system or there's no options for us. It's like actually there's more, but I didn't know that at the time. So, solely because I didn't want nothing, I ended up reporting to the police. And certainly in relation to my privilege as a white person, as a cisgender person, like I was believed and I started going through that system. And just realized very quickly how painful and re-traumatizing it was. And how much it recreated the powerlessness and the voicelessness that I had felt during the actual rape. And so it had been 2 years before we got to a preliminary trial. And I was told all these terrifying things, like if you don't answer all the questions on the stand, you could be charged as non-cooperative. And it felt really terrifying, and it felt like I was on trial. And interestingly, like as I'm writing my book and I'm writing these parts, I'm like, wow, like the impacts of court are still here. They're still in my body. They're still that, like, as I'm writing about it, I'm like reminding myself, like, you're in an art room right now, you're not in a courtroom. So it's wild, like the impact court and secondary victimization, which is like harm caused by institutional response. It's wild the impact it can have. And by the time I was subpoenaed for the criminal trial, having experienced all that, I was just like, I don't want to do this. Like, this is too painful. And what is it all for? And so my first thought was, I'm going to drop the charges. But then I felt really devastated. And again, I was back to my panic attacks and tears. And I kind of had a friend say, like, okay, I know the court process wasn't working for you, but this also clearly isn't working for you. So what would meaningful justice look like to you, if anything was possible? And that's a question to me that we all need to be asking ourselves, no matter the circumstances. Like, what does justice mean to us? It's not really a question we're given permission to explore. And it really allowed me to just open that up in myself and kind of turn inward and be curious about that. And my response was basically restorative justice without having the name for it. So I said, like, I'd want to sit down with this person. I'd want to ask the questions that I've had for years. I'd want him to actually apologize, take accountability. I want to make sure, like, he changes so he never does this again. And my friend is just this fiery woman. And she was like, well, you should make it happen. And I was like, okay. So,
Wow.
yeah. So it kind of lit a fire, because it's like, I don't know, that's such a gift we can give each other as friends or whatever we are. Like, hearing someone's needs and then validating them to a degree where it's like, you should actually go for that thing. Like, that thing's valid and you should act on it. Like, that was such a profound and bold thing to do, and like an emboldening thing to do. And it did that for me. So then, like, I started researching, and that's when I found restorative justice. And that's when I ended up like calling a meeting with the crown attorneys in the states, you'd say prosecutors. And I basically told them, like, this is what I want. And in short, like, it was a super polarizing response, because we're so taught to equate justice to punishment. And it took a lot of back and forth. And one prosecutor in particular who just really understood, like, the harm caused by the criminal legal process and the need for alternatives. And just based on that, she was like, I'm going to fight for this. And I actually saw her like 2 days ago. We went boxing together, which is so cool.
That's so cool.
Um, but yeah, she really fought for it. And so thanks to her, um, I got the call that my case was going to move forward with restorative justice and really set a precedent as one of the first sexual assault cases to take that route through the courts. We'll definitely talk more about like the lineages of these practices throughout. But yeah, so I basically got a call that he was going to start therapy right away, which is what I asked for. And then we'd eventually do this circle process. And it was so meaningful to know he was doing that deep work in therapy. And by the time we got to the circle, I knew he was taking accountability. The mediators had done so much to create a space that was as safe as it could possibly be. And we got into that room and they asked us just one question, really, which was, what brought you here today? And we spent 8 hours speaking to that question. I got to meet all of my needs in terms of like voicing those questions, getting everything out of my body that I've been holding for years, voicing the impacts in an uncensored way, because the court does ask us to show up as their version of a quote, quote, credible victim. And that was really powerful. And then by the time it got to him, he did take accountability and he did share about like what he had learned in the therapy process and how he learned about rape culture and how all of these messages within our society around masculinity like really led him to this place of justifying behavior like this. And he talked about everything he learned and the deep consent work and his own sort of like struggle with the shame and remorse and the initial denial and minimizing, and then having to really confront this and what that was like. And then he did look at me and say, I'm sorry, I sexually assaulted you, and there's nothing I can do to take it back. And I hope that being here today can help. And some of us might have an inclination of like, that's not enough. But I think we have to remember like what is meaningful to the survivor and what is keeping this person from from being violent in the future. And those, to me, those are the two things that matter. Like, it's like, what does the survivor need for their healing and what's going to prevent this person from being violent again? And it felt like we really, really, really did that work beyond what I thought was possible. And I was really mind blown. I was really mind blown by the process. And I've told this story like hundreds of times, and I'm still a part of me is still mind blown by it, because it was like actual closure and healing and a release of so much trauma in such a visceral way. And I left that circle process and I was like, we need to be loud about this, because why don't people know about options beyond court or nothing? And so that's really what made me go to the media and share my story. And as soon as I received the responses from thousands and thousands of survivors around the world, I was like, okay, I'm never going to shut up about this until we all know that this option exists. And now that mission has evolved into, we know it exists and we have access to it if we want it. Because the main thing I heard was people saying, I wish I knew about this. And that came in so many different forms and stories and packages. And so that survivor right to know our options has really been the fuel for me in doing this work all the way up until today.
Whoa. Wow, wow, wow. So many thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I'm so grateful you had that friend that encouraged you to really think about what you needed and sounded like helped you figure out how to make that happen. And yeah, it's just so wild. So you're in Canada, and I know the legal system's a little different, but you work with so many people in the US now. So something like what you experienced, that is an option.
It depends, same as here. Like here, it depends on the province. There, it depends on the state. The thing is, both of our criminal legal systems are a result of British colonization. So our legal systems are actually very similar. Like there's not really much different. For example, something a lot of people don't necessarily know is that a survivor isn't considered the victim in the eyes of the court. They're considered a witness of a crime done to the state. And yeah, so I'm just a witness in the trial. So that's comes from the British, and that's why we have such similar systems. But it varies state to state. What people can access pretty much anywhere, thanks to amazing organizations and grassroots initiatives, is restorative and transformative justice processes completely outside of the criminal legal system. So never involving police or anything like that, and going right to those. What varies state to state and province to province is whether prosecutors can make those referrals. So that's where it depends.
Okay. Yeah, because as I'm listening, I'm just thinking about my experience and the court system here. We didn't go to trial, but there was just years of court hearings still and parole hearings and yeah. And what I really noticed too, going through that, in my case, there was a few other victims as well. And so we all met through that process. And I think I had a little more courage than I would have if it was just me to find answers as I thought about the other women who all experienced something very similar to what I did. And I don't know what that is in some of us, like human nature of like, oh, maybe I did something wrong or it's my fault or I should just move on. But if you hear the same story about like your best friend or your mom or someone you love, you're like, what? I'm gonna
Mhm.
take them out, and you just like such a different fire that you're like, I'm gonna take care of it. We're gonna, I got this. Um, so that was like one, I don't know about saying gift I found in it, but I really felt very emboldened to like get answers and make sure that all of us girls knew our options. And it was incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Nobody seemed to know what rights victims had. It was everybody knew about the rights of the criminal, and it was like the whole criminal justice system was set up for him. And they forgot that there's this going to be this whole other group of people who also had rights, and what about us? And it was just fascinating and horrifying and like you said, super re-traumatizing to just over and over. Now you're getting another phone call, there's another hearing, or this happened or that happened, and me calling and being just sent around to from the prison we don't know, call this place. Oh, we're not sure, call that place. And it's exhausting. And if you're in crisis and having PTSD, it's just like nobody wants to do that, and we shouldn't have to, just to know like the basic rights even. So I just think it's really incredible that there are other opportunities outside of the courtroom and maybe too like what you're experiencing, this life of joy, by being able to really find closure in that. And I don't think many of us even dream of having that opportunity. And I have a close friend who, when he hears how afraid I still get once in a while, it's like it just still haunts me. And he'll say, like, dude, just go talk to him. Just go talk to him and like face your fear. And, I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. But also, I don't know if I'm legally even allowed to. He's not allowed to come talk to me. Like what would be the legal ramifications? Could he call the cops on me? It's just like, it's just so interesting. And there's just this whole system that is exhausting. So, uh,
Yeah. Well, let me just jump in and first of all say thank you so much for sharing that. I know we've talked before about like our victim survivor journeys, and um it's so beyond horrible like what you experienced, and it's so powerful how committed you were to knowing your rights and like standing up for the other survivors as well. And I can really relate to what you said about it being somewhat easy to like rally that fire for everyone else and for ourselves alone it can be a lot more challenging. So I hear you in that, and it's the way the system's built. Like you said, something along the lines of like it's like they forgot about you, like the victims. And they did. Like if we look at the literal system, it's not like I was saying, it's not the accused versus the victim, it's the accused versus the state. And you're just a witness that's helping them get the evidence they need to prosecute. So even when people say like, oh, we need to approach it in a victim-centered way, how can you take that foundation and structure and make that victim centered without adjusting the foundation at all? Like, this is where I get really passionate about not necessarily taking away the option of trial for anyone who feels like that's the right path for them, but opening more doors, because we really have to acknowledge how much harm the system piles on top of a lot of harm already, how inhumane that is, and even to a value check of like, am I cool with supporting that system? Am I cool with promoting the idea that that should be the only option for survivors. Like, I think all of us doing that value check. And that's why I said, like, asking ourselves that question, what does justice mean to me? And allowing ourselves to get creative in our response. Cause that's, like you said, like, a lot of us don't even let ourselves go there in terms of hoping, dreaming, imagining. But we deserve to. Like, if we think about anything else, like someone who's experienced the most toxic relationships, after that, it can take a lot for that person to be like, what would a healthy relationship look like? What would an empowering relationship look like? And we can do that with justice. Like, what would empowering justice responses look and feel like? And like, what direction do we need to turn ourselves towards in order to go that way?
Hmm. Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah. Tell me more about Survivors for Justice Reform. I mean, obviously, you're extremely passionate about this, and over the years of speaking and sharing your story, I'm sure you've heard so many people's stories and questions, and I assume that's what led you to go, okay, let's get, I don't know, the whole world involved, which I just love. You're like, let's make it global. This needs to be
Yeah.
amazing. So,
Sometimes I'm such a like fire sign Sagittarius. Like Sagittarius, like I'll just like shoot out arrows and then I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, but sometimes that's the best way. And I'm a big fan of like, don't wait till perfection to act on things.
yes.
But
I'll say I'm a Sagittarius too, and my one of my favorite mottos is start before you're ready. And I
yeah,
always tell people, I'm like, it's never going to be perfect. Just let's go.
let's do it. Yeah, I'm
I
so
get it.
happy for that. Yeah. So Survivors for Justice Reform, I wanted to start this like years ago because what I was finding, I guess there's three important components to this. So like one is these movements aren't new. Like restorative justice isn't something that was just created. I think a lot of people talk about it like it's like a new idea, but it's actually a pre-colonial idea. Like before British colonization, before the British North America Act, which I believe was like only 152 or maybe 157 years ago, we didn't have this criminal legal system. It wasn't the dominant way. It wasn't seen as the quote, quote, correct way. It was colonization that did that. And so prior to that, we see that indigenous communities, and really, if we look around the world, like African communities, Jewish, Mennonite, is it frozen right now? Oh,
Mm-mm.
okay. Sorry. Jewish, Mennonite, Latin America, we see, and like there's more than that as well. We see all of these incredible examples of restorative practices and justice that didn't rely on punitive measures. They relied on community and healing and bringing people together to repair or transform the harm caused to people. And then when British colonization happened, it all shifted towards not addressing harm that's happened to people, but addressing broken laws and punishing people accordingly. And so that's when that shift happened. Within that time, there's been communities continuing to do that restorative work outside of the court system. However, in a colonial context, our culture has really said like the criminal legal system is the one correct way to do that. And we see that a lot with like in the violence against women sector, which can be very white, very carceral. We see this sort of thing of like prosecute rapists, criminal legal system is the only correct way to go. So that's like one piece of this. So then I have this experience that blows my mind. I don't really know all this rich history. I'm just like, hey, court sucked. Don't want that. Don't want nothing. Would rather have this. And mind blown by the process. And then I share it with the media and I start being asked to do keynotes and speeches. And I'm getting all these messages from survivors saying, I wish I knew about this. Like, I deeply want this. And at the same time, when I'm doing these speeches, there's always at least one person in the room who's like, I'm glad this works for you. I don't think anyone else would want this though.
Mm.
And so I'm holding all of this at once and I'm hearing that. And then I'm getting this flood of messages of, I deeply want this from survivors. And I'm like, how do we how do I de-unicorn myself? Like, how do I show that survivors do want this? Like, these are movements led by survivors, started by survivors. Um, these are movements that have come from survivors, like boldly naming the harm caused by the criminal legal system. So it became to me a matter of like, we need to shift representation. We need survivors to lead in storytelling when we feel compelled to do so. What happens when we all come together and we do that work collectively? Because I really do see these movements as puzzle pieces, and I think we all are compelled to address a different puzzle piece. And as soon as I try to address the puzzle piece that you, Blaze, are truly, genuinely compelled to take on, I think that's when I get burnt out. That's when I'm like, I can't do this. I'm exhausted. So to me, it's like, what happens when we all come together, we claim our different puzzle pieces, and then we really drive the movement forward. And it's also a practical matter of not doing double work. Like, it's like a group project, right? Like, I can start from scratch on anything, but maybe Jane in Australia already wrote a whole paper on that and I can just cite it. Like, so the power of community.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, it's just about people knowing their options. And like you said, not everybody does want that path. And when you have those people in the audience that are like, I don't think so, they're like, that's fine, but at least now you know. And maybe someone you meet will be like, I wish there wasn't this other way. Because I personally don't necessarily think it would be safe for every survivor to face their perpetrator. Like every situation is different, every person is different. Um, and I work in the like addiction and alcohol recovery field, and I feel a similar way there, just as far as like there are different paths to recovery. There is mindful drinking, there's sobriety, there's these different things that it's like you do what feels right to you, but you get to know the the harms that might be there physically, mentally, emotionally, and you get to have that experience on your own. But here's information, and so I think of that too with the restorative justice. It's like not everyone's path is the same, but let's look at all these options that are out there so that you can make an informed decision.
Yes, I that's such a good parallel because I've thought that before too. Like, imagine we said there's only one type of therapy, and it's step one, two, three, and if that doesn't work for you, there must be something wrong with you. And like you're shit out of luck, right? Like, we can't do that. So to me, it's really important to make it clear too that what I'm advocating for and what I don't think I even explained, like Survivors for Justice Reform mission, which is like we're a global coalition of survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, and or human trafficking and allies who are advocating for access to restorative justice and or transformative justice. And I know that's a little wordy, but a main premise of it is that we're recognizing that there's no, like you just said, there's no one size fits all approach. And as soon as we put forth a box that says, like, this is the one correct way to do things, fit yourself into it, that's when we fail people because victims are not a monolith, perpetrators are not a monolith. We all have different needs. And something I love about restorative justice is that it can take so many different shapes. Like, it doesn't require the person meeting with the person who assaulted them. That can happen, but it can also look like letter exchanges, volunteer work, surrogate processes, which means that you're doing a dialogue with someone else who caused harm to someone else and is taking accountability. And I've heard people talk about that. There's a TED talk from Dr. Alyssa Ackerman, and she went through that process as a survivor. And she speaks about it in a very similar way to how I speak about mine in terms of the healing that it brought. And so the idea here is you shouldn't have to fit yourself into a box. Processes and systems and the people in them, if they truly care, will shape their process according to what you need and according to what is accessible to you. And we know we've experienced that, hopefully, with love, with friendship, with therapy, maybe with teachers who are inclusive. Like, that to me is just a shift that should happen anyways in most areas of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I'm definitely going to watch that TED Talk because that surrogate, when you're talking about that, is that like, are you talking to a person who's essentially an actor or someone who really did commit some type of violence against someone?
There's someone who really did commit that type, a similar type of harm to someone else. So and they're typically only part of these programs if they've done a significant amount of meaningful accountability work, so that we know there's not going to be a piling on of harm. um of course, nothing can be guaranteed in terms of like if that person goes off book or off the rails or something. But I'm actually doing a 6-day training right now on facilitated dialogue for sexual harm. And it's been amazing. It's at an organization called Community Justice Initiatives. And I'm like, y'all have the framework. Like, this needs to be everywhere in the world because it's so trauma informed. It's so caring. There are so many options based on needs and accessibility. They can do the victim offender circles, but they can also do the surrogate processes, and they have trained volunteers with that lived experience, like who have done accountability groups. Like, it's just really incredible. And I've been really struck by how not rigid it is. Like, they were like, you're going to get so annoyed with how often we respond to a question with "it depends." But that's so caring to me because they're saying, like, whoever's in front of us, we are going to collaborate with them to create a process that feels as healing and supportive and accessible as it possibly can for them. And the contrast between that and court is, it's not even on the same planet. Like, it's so different.
What's the name of that group again?
Community justice initiatives.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And the
Yeah.
trauma-informed piece, because I felt too that throughout my process there were people, even like police officers who some cared deeply and worked around the clock trying to like solve crime, and really my mom would like go to the police station and take like bread baskets and stuff to these men who were just working really truly overtime trying to figure things out. And so that gave me a interesting perspective on law enforcement too, that I still hold today that was really important for me to see. Um, but I'll still say in some of that, it's like we care so much, yet we haven't been trained on how to be truly trauma informed. They get this much training of that and this much of like take them down or whatever, you know. And so even, or just people who are busy, attorneys who are like, they're also not acting trauma informed, even though they want to win the case and they want you to get justice, but it's also can be very aggressive and abrasive. And just there's like a lot of that abrasive energy I felt, even from the people who I knew cared, but they
Yeah.
couldn't slow down to take the time or weren't given that opportunity from their supervisors to have these kind of trainings that sometimes could make all the difference for the person sitting across from them who can't handle a lot of that in those moments. So I'm definitely going to look up that organization because I wish every community had something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of great organizations out there doing that work. I'll share like a resource guide at the end of our conversation. Remind me if I forget. Um, but yeah, I relate to that so much because I think when I was going through preliminary trial, like I remember really well meeting Crown who prepped me in the most beautiful way. Like she was like, this is going to be a really painful experience, but I hope we can make it like as empowering as we possibly can and everything. And that was so lovely. And if I'm like sitting on a bunch of knives and I have someone like rubbing my back, being like, I know this is painful. I'm here. I'm still sitting on a bunch of knives. It's still painful. So that's kind of what I was saying about like, we see these little tweaks happening of like, oh, here's how we can make it a little more trauma informed. Here's how we can make the courtroom a little more trauma informed. And that's great. We need those trainings, those efforts, those people. And if the foundation is deeming us as witness just disposable evidence witnesses in a crime done to the state, like how truly victim centered can that be, no matter how many little tweaks we make? And I don't have the answers to that. Like those are just things I wonder about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm thinking a lot about the community I'm in here in Alaska and in Anchorage, and we have the Awake shelter for survivors of DV and STAR, which is a rape crisis center. And if we had something like what you're talking about that could be adjacent to those, or an additional resource that works closely, that would just there would just be more people to help, and that's what I feel like is like a lot of times you're not even getting those resources until something terrible's happened. And then the staff at these nonprofits, they're working around the clock, but like right now they're having some funding challenges and they only have so much money and so many people to service a big population that needs assistance. So
Mhm.
bring that into the world. Anyone in Alaska listening, let's figure it out. Let's add more.
And they do trainings too. So like that's what I'm thinking is I'm just like if they can train a bunch of people to set this up, well then there we go. And that's part of why with the coalition, like we're a global coalition, but then we have over 30 chapters at this point, including the Alaska chapter, which you feel free to edit this out if you don't want me to say it, but which we are very lucky to have Blaze acting as the state representative for the coalition chapter in Alaska. And the vision of that is like, can we create community locally in order to organize, address gaps locally while we're all exchanging resources and ideas between chapters, and while we're also having this broader global coalition support those local efforts through press, media, here to amplify any petitions you need right away. Like there's that strategy to it too, because there's these amazing programs that exist. And then there's people who feel like they're just sitting down to the drawing board. And it's like, no, no, like consult with these people who have been doing it for 20 years. Like those questions are already answered. Like get the strategies and it can be created, it can be developed anywhere if it isn't already.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful. It's really exciting. And I'm super grateful to be a part of it and to see how much we can make that grow in all the different areas that you have people now. It's really, really cool. So just thank you for creating that and doing what you needed to do in your own life to have the energy to create something like that and to keep it moving forward. I mean, yeah, okay. I know you are a busy Sagittarius, so I won't keep you too much longer, but I would love to hear what are some of those things that you do just in your personal life to stay energized, stay motivated, or maybe even if they're still, you're talking about writing the book, things still coming up sometimes that are continual healing, I'd guess. How do you move through those things for other people that are looking for some guidance?
Yeah, lots of ways. One thing I'll say first is that this work, as even though it has its hard moments, it is definitely a part of my own healing and reclamation. And I approach it that way, like meaning making, channeling emotion into action and art has always been an essential part of my not only healing, but survival. And so I want to make that clear because I think sometimes people feel like they have to step into advocacy after they go through a trauma or if they hold a certain identity. And it's like, if that feels terribly draining and traumatizing to you, don't do it. Like, that's my opinion. Like, it's also like this work can take so many different shapes. And that's why I said the puzzle piece thing, because it's like you have to find the puzzle piece that's genuinely compelling and inspiring to you. And then that stay there. Like, don't try to do all the other things. So, I wanted to say that because I'm like, in many ways, this work is part of filling my own cup because I do podcasts like this and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm so passionate. Like, I feel so connected to my purpose and this like beautiful vision of the world. And I love connecting with people who also feel that way. Right. So that's part of it. Beyond that, I definitely do a lot of things. I'm fortunate to be able to access therapy. I have an amazing therapist. I'm a big fan of like your somatics, your internal family systems, like stuff that involves the body beyond just like talk therapy, which is can be great too. Um, what else? Writing for sure. I've been journaling since I was like 9 and I do I feel like you've probably read The Artist's Way too. Like from yeah, I do. I knew it. I do my morning pages. My partner and I do our morning pages together. Having my partner's love, honestly, like is really grounding and really yeah, she's really good at knowing what I need. So she'll be like, babe, close your laptop. Let's go take our puppy into the forest. And like, it doesn't have to be that serious. And I'm like, wow, thank God for you. Yeah. And then movement. I've gotten really into my partner is also a boxing instructor, and I go to like all of their classes because I think that's real good therapy. Um, and it's fun, and same with like dance and yeah. So a lot of different things.
Yeah, and I like hearing about all the connection you have with your body and healing. And I think that sometimes that's a missing element where in the beginning of my healing process, it was very like much up here. And things were happening and I was rewiring my brain and that was great. But then I finally realized like, wait, there's a disconnect because my body is reacting still in this like more intense way, even though things are like calmer here. It's just weird, everything works together. But a lot of people believe that a lot of trauma gets trapped in our body, in our cells, and we have to work that out. And I think that physical part is huge and has made a huge difference for me. Even just like a living room dance party by myself. If I'm starting to feel like anxious, I just put on a song I love and dance crazy and feel better in like 2 minutes. Um,
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like we can't think our way through everything. Like we can't think our way through trauma completely. That's part of the work for sure. Um, but if we have like even just not to get into a whole thing around this, but even just like freeze responses, like we have so much adrenaline and like big physiological responses leading up to freeze response, and then our body just like slams the brakes. And so like once we get out of that, we have to do something with all of that energy that we slammed the brakes on. Like we have to move the adrenaline through. And like that's why we see like animals shaking after they play dead and whatnot, is to like, how do we move that energy through? And oftentimes we try to just like sit still and breathe or think through it. And sometimes, like you're saying, you just need to like have a dance party, punch a bag, like shake your body, bawl your eyes out, scream, like actually let it move through you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I believe too, for sexual assault survivors, freeze is one of the most common responses. And it doesn't get talked about enough when we're learning about, we hear fight or flight all the time. Nobody talks about freeze, which is just as common, if not more, than the other two, especially when experiencing some of these just huge violations. And that was part of my experience. And no one's ever worded it like you just did to me. And even thinking of animals, like I've never thought about that. And so thank you. I needed to hear that pretty badly. And because a lot of it too is like, they're like, let's meditate, let's go to yoga. And I'm like, let's go to the top of a mountain and scream until we lose our
Yeah.
voice. Like, I feel like there's still a lot of anger inside of me. And it's like, how do I get that out? I'm supposed to be nice. Like, I need to be a good mother and a professional woman and, all these things. It's like, but also, like, I'd really love to, like, fight someone. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, what I know, but
Yeah.
it's inspiring me. There's a Rumble boxing gym down the street. I've not gone. I've
Yeah.
multiple friends that teach there, and it's so maybe that's the missing element. My next step, boxing.
I love that. I'm so glad that landed as it needed to, because in my head I was like, Marlee, why are you opening such a big topic with a few minutes left? But it is such important information that we're not taught about. And so, yes, if this inspires someone to scream, dance, punch a bag, whatever it is, great. And if we're ever in the same city, Blaze, we must do those things together too.
Yeah. Well, some cities have a rage room. That's something I've always wanted to do, where you just go break a bunch of shit.
I went to that. I went to my friend took me to that very soon after the sexual trauma that I just
Oh,
shared, because I've been such a suppressed anger girly in my life. And she was like, yo, you need to grab a baseball bat and just break some shit for an hour at least.
wow. Yep. Yeah. Cool. The sacred rage. Yeah.
Good rage, yes.
Well, Marlee, thank you so, so much for everything you've shared today, everything you're doing for the world. It is just absolutely incredible and just such an honor to know you. And I'm glad I had the courage to randomly reach out to you on Instagram and say, I want to be you when I grow up. Will you talk to me?
It was mutual. When I saw you reach out, I was like, she seems very cool.
Well, that's awesome. So we're going to share, I'll put in the notes resources and how to get involved in Survivors for Justice Reform and just all the great things you're doing for, I also like that you mentioned for allies because I think that's a huge part of the community or people that want to support someone they love who's gone through some struggles. So yeah, so thank you, Marlee. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening.